You and other people call this book a bold manifesto. It's titled Promiscuities, The Struggle for Secret Womanhood. It's written by Nancy Wolfe. Nancy Wolfe is here.
Secret Struggle for Womanhood.
Rather, Naomi Wolfe, I'm sorry. The Secret Struggle for Womanhood. Naomi Wolfe is in the studio with us, and she's also written the Beauty Myth. And you and other people have called this book bold. They've called it outstanding. They've said it's explicit. They've said many things about this book. But how did you arrive at writing this book and this title, Promiscuities? Where did you get that title?
Well, it's obviously an ironic title. It's about the culture that is bombarding younger and younger girls coming of age today. This book, Promiscuities, is my sexual coming of age story and that of the young women that I grew up with at ground zero of the sexual revolution in San Francisco in the years between the pill and AIDS. And the culture that I describe in it is even more intense now. It's a culture in which younger and younger girls are being really hit consistently with messages saying, have sex, do it young, compete with Penthouse, but their own strong, confusing feelings are often shrouded in secrecy. It's a culture that gives girls the message that they should be sexually available, but not sexually in charge of themselves. And I wrote Promiscuities as a way to let young women coming of age today feel proud of their femininity, negotiate the minefield of sexual pressure that they face, and make wise choices.
Well, obviously, you didn't have to do a lot of research to do the book, but I'm just wondering, you say that this is in part about you?
Yes, this is.
Well, I'm just wondering how much
story.
Formal research did you do to put the book together?
Well, as you'll see in the back notes, the bibliography in the notes draw on literally hundreds of texts because it's not only my own story and that of my friends.
So you did do quite a bit of research.
Right. I also look at how other cultures deal with the issue of female sexuality, and as a grown woman I was very moved to discover and surprised to discover that even though we came of age in an atmosphere that was talking a lot about sexual revolution for women, we grew up under three big myths about the nature of female sexuality and desire. And so I did research many other cultures to find out how wrong the information we had was. For example, other cultures have understood much better than we do that it is in fact women and not men who are the more passionate sex. Other cultures have understood the subtleties of female sexual response better than we do. For instance, we have a 4-stage model of female sexual response, and first century China had a 32-stage map of female sexual response.
So what are the three myths?
Well, I mentioned the one that we certainly were raised with, that you know, boys are crazed with testosterone, but girls are not supposed to have strong sexual feelings or as strong. And as I said, it turns out that most cultures, including our own, till only 180 years ago, took for granted that women's desire was the more overwhelming. Another myth I mentioned was that this is the best of all possible worlds for women. In fact, porn culture, as I call it, does not give women a lot of really positive, affirming sexual scripts. And I looked at cultures like the Tantra, like the Kama Sutra, like the Han Dynasty in ancient China, that treated female desire as this sort of sacred cosmic force, this most powerful and sacred force in the universe, and as a consequence developed belief systems that really treated female sexuality quite reverentially. I think we can learn a lot from that.
All right, what changes do you think in America's society would make growing up into womanhood easier?
Well, the numbers are quite staggering about how we're failing our young women. No culture has done what we do, which is we've placed teenage girls in the forefront of sexual negotiation, and since the sexual revolution we've stripped them of all of the social supports and social boundaries that, for better or worse, used to at least give them a sense of protectedness while making their way on the journey to womanhood. And now what I find is, borne out by the statistics, half of teenage girls are having intercourse. Of those, 1 in 4 is going to face an unwanted pregnancy before she's even out of her teens. Really staggering numbers. And of the men involved, the males involved in those teen pregnancies, 1/5 are adult men. Now, in my age group, in the place I grew up, we didn't actually bring the babies to term. Most of us perhaps had abortions. But while I'm pro-choice, I am struck, going back to interview the women I grew up with, that it was those teenage abortions that were lastingly wounding to them, that they could not integrate. So we can do a much better job teaching girls that their sexual feelings are natural, that their femininity is something to be proud of, but most important, that their sexuality is something to treat with self-respect. No one is giving girls coming of age in this Beavis and Butthead culture the message that their sexuality is in them. No one can bestow it on them, not a 16-year-old boy or a 30-year-old man. No one can take it away from them, not any kind of sexual violation, that it's always something to treat with wisdom, with self-regard and self-respect. So I talk in the end of the book about practical things parents can do to give coming of age rituals to their daughters to convey these messages and ways to change how we teach about sex in schools.
What we'll try to do is to get to a few of those before we go. There is a part in the book, and before we get into that, I want to tell you out there that if you want to join in, you can call us. The number's on your screen. If you want to talk specifically about this particular book, which is called Promiscuities, and this book is written by Naomi Wolf, who is in studio with us now, answering essentially questions about what led her to write this book and what this book means for young women, what it could mean for young women, and essentially the understanding of America as it relates to the sexuality and the understanding of the sexuality of young women. There is something in here that is quite profound, I found, in reading this particular book. It's about the Barbie doll. It's in chapter 2. It's called The Facts of Life, and in this particular paragraph here you say, Barbie was the first toy that taught us what was expected of us sexually. The fact that some of the moms were trying to become hip young Barbies made it that much more important for us to understand. The 12-inch dolls held the key to it all. That is why now as well as then, girls are obsessed with them. I don't think any guy will tell you that they knew or even suspected anything remotely close to this about those dolls.
Well, the Barbie and girls' relationship to Barbie is a well-kept secret of American female adolescence.
Really?
In my opinion. I mean, this was the first image I had of what adult female sexuality was supposed to look like. And
if I could get you to describe that, because there are 50,000 different types of Barbies now, but what was your first Barbie like, and what did describe it?
Sure. Well, there may be 50,000 different types in terms of sort of outfits and occupations, but there's one basic body type, which is almost anorexically thin, standing on tiptoe with sort of perfect conical breasts. And, you know, she was nominally supposed to have a profession, but basically her profession was changing her clothes, putting on her clothes, taking off her clothes. That's why I say later on we intuited that Barbie was essentially a call girl. That, you know, she wasn't really paying for that pink Cadillac with her nurse's salary. It was a toy that was transmitting to us that this was a kind of polished version of adult female sexuality. It was something we would have to live up to. It was something that required a lot of accessories. It was not something that we sort of owned and would come into without a lot of changing of ourselves into an appropriate cultural product. And I would say girls experience Barbie as the precursor to what, by the time they're 12 or 13 or 14, they say quite clearly is their sense that they need to live up to penthouse pets. 14-year-old girls all over America have confirmed the thesis in the book. Quite frankly, they're very straightforward about it. They say they know that they need to compete with their boyfriend's penthouse playmates. They know that if they don't offer their boyfriends intercourse, the boys will look elsewhere, and by 13, 14, the boys feel that they have pressure to have intercourse, or else they're not considered real men. They know that no one has given them the message that their sexuality is something to treat with self-esteem and self-respect, and that certainly boys are not getting that message from their own penthouse education at all about how to treat girls' sexuality with respect, observing limits within the context of seeing them as total people who are human beings. And they're also quite clear that the grown-ups' heads are in the sand about the kinds of very explicit pressures facing them. They are quite honest and frank about the fact that the grown-ups are in denial. They say, you know, the evidence of what we're facing is all around us, but all the grown-ups are saying, oh, my daughter couldn't be struggling with those issues. My daughter couldn't be pressured into those situations. Sadly, the numbers show that that's not the case.
Well, it's quite clear that many adults are not in the know on this situation. As I survey around the room at the expression on the faces of the crew in here when you talk about some of these things.
I don't know. I think that most of the women, certainly most of my audiences, 2/3 are female, people of all ages. The women remember exactly what I'm talking about from their own adolescence, especially those born after 1960. And the men often relate very strongly to this material. As dads, they use Promiscuities as a way to open up discussion with their just adolescent boys about how to respect girls' sexuality and how to treat girls as total people beyond what Penthouse teaches them.
We're talking with Naomi Wolf. She's the author of Promiscuities, The Secret Struggle for Womanhood, and she has a 3-year-old girl. She's married to President Clinton's speechwriter, David Shipley. Lives here in Washington, grew up in San Francisco, as she mentioned, and she studied both at Yale University and Oxford College, Oxford University, where she was a Rhodes Scholar as well, and has lectured widely on women's issues and recently taught at George Washington University, where she's now a visiting scholar. And her essays appear regularly in the New Republic, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, Glamour, Ms., and other publications. First phone call comes from Sparks, Nevada. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. Can you hear me?
Good
Yes,
morning.
sir.
Yes, I can.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with what you were just talking about there, but I had a question on, does your book talk very much about the difference between sex and love? I mean...
Oh boy, that's the essential theme of the book. Many of the after effects that women suffer from in their adolescence, coming of age in the culture that I described, really stay with them in their adult relationships through their 20s, even into their 30s, well into family life. A lot of boyfriends and lovers and husbands are buying the book for their wives or girlfriends who did have intercourse too soon, whose first intercourse was under conditions of pressure, who did feel that they were coerced in some way, or who, experienced some sense of being treated like an object, that their initiation into sex was not in a context of love and respect. And I talk about how the kind of sex education we get, even the kind of sex education that's now in the schools, has really actually taken a step backward from earlier decades in this century, when they did a much better job connecting sexual activity among adolescents to issues of love and responsibility. One of the more controversial things I call for in Promiscuities, but one that I believe in strongly as a mother, is that we need to bring back petting. And what that means is there used to be a teen culture of petting, first base, second base, third base. Most of us born before 1960 remember that. In the sexual revolution, teen petting culture collapsed. Now kids feel pressured to go from 0 to 60. This has bad effects on boys, I think, but really bad effects on girls, because the happy memories in Promiscuities of girls' exploration turn into rather sad memories of being forced or feeling compelled to go to intercourse too soon. And all of the risks that this puts on girls disproportionately to boys are quite extreme. Jocelyn Elders got fired for daring to suggest that we talk about masturbation in schools. But in fact, I believe that if you give kids information about safe, age-appropriate, limited ways to explore their sexual feelings without the risks and dangers and inappropriate emotional overwhelming feelings of intercourse too soon, we go a long way toward teaching boys respect for girls, teaching girls respect for themselves, and connecting teenage love to teenage sexuality. Kids in the past, in the good old days, did not abstain from sexual activity. They abstained from sexual intercourse, and parents and educators taught petting and treated petting as a social safety valve.
I have one quick question, and just please give me a brief answer, because we'd like you to devote your time to the callers. What is safe attention or safe exploration? How do you do that?
Well, the way that you'll find people in small-town conservative America understood teenagers could do it. First base, second base, third base. It's safe, it's respectful, it's limited. It gives girls power in sexual negotiations that they don't now have.
Right. Next phone call comes from Radcliffe, Kentucky. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Naomi. Thank you for your book.
Thank you.
Okay. Fortunately, I was raised by a wonderful mother who taught me that I had to respect myself. Unfortunately, most girls do not get that.
Right. And even if they get it in their homes, they're not getting it from the culture at large. That's quite right.
Exactly. And my mother taught me great respect for myself. And I recall one instance when I was 14, and by the way, I'm 37 now.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going out with a young man, and she thought I was mature enough to go out on dates by myself.
Mm-hmm.
And he wanted me to touch his private parts. And I broke up with him that night. And I went home and I told my mother about it. Now, I don't know how many girls can do that with their mothers. And they really need to be able to tell their mothers what's going on.
Yeah.
I was able to. And you were talking about the Barbie doll earlier, and I thought that was really strange because my mother had a big zero on that. She would not allow us to buy a Barbie doll.
Interesting. What was
she
her
said that
reasoning?
Was terrible. There was another doll out at the time when I was young called Tammy.
I remember Tammy.
And Tammy looked normal.
What would normal be?
She allowed us to have Tammy, but she wanted us more. She said, you know, Tammy looked real. You know, as much as a doll can look real.
Right.
But she said the Barbie doll was just totally outrageous. And plus, at that time, most of the Barbies were blonde hair and blue-eyed.
Yep.
Now, I'm the daughter. Excuse me, my mother has dark hair and brown eyes. I'm brown-haired, brown-eyed. And my two little girls are Hispanic. And I'm raising two little girls, so I'm going to raise them the way my mother did. But I have a hard time with most of our dolls being blonde hair and blue-eyed. It's like that has to be.
I hear what you're saying.
I have a big problem with that, and we're not through with that either. You look in a store at little Barbie dolls and any kind of dolls. Most of them are blonde hair and blue-eyed. So that's still, obviously, to some of the toy makers, is what we're supposed to look for in beauty.
Right. I hear what you're saying. You may be interested in my first book, which talks a lot about this particular issue. It's called The Beauty Myth, and it talks about how girls and women feel a lot of pressure to live up to unrealistic expectations of physical appearance. But I'm glad you were able to talk to your mom, and I do call on parents to be much more honest and open with their kids about the kinds of pressures that the kids are facing. Something very interesting I learned by looking at other cultures that do a better job understanding how to turn girls into women. The way we define girls becoming women in this culture is through a passive biological process. You're a woman when you grow breasts, ideally the right kind of breasts, as you mentioned. You're a woman when you have intercourse. Other cultures understood that you need to teach a girl that becoming a woman is about mastering your character, developing values, mastering skills, learning how to stand up for yourself, learning how to take on the responsibilities of becoming an adult. And at the end of the book, I talk about how important it is for mothers to enlist their adult female friends in rituals like collecting a wisdom book for their girls' coming of age, where the adult women write down the wisdom that they gleaned on their own journey to womanhood. The reason for this is that sometimes issues come up when you're a teenage girl that you do not want to talk to even the coolest mom about. You don't want to talk to your mom about masturbation, by and large. You don't want to talk to your mom about a number of very personal things sometimes, no matter how great she is. Other cultures understood that when you have designated adult women, like, you know, your cool Aunt Kim, or your cool godmother, or, you know, your cool mother's friend who's available in that particular capacity, then you know you've got someone to confide in, you've got someone to get answers from, you've got someone who shares your mom's values, who can be a sounding board. And that's why these rituals of coming of age at the back of the book that enlist other older women are, I think, so important. I know that my aunt's daughter, who was given one of these wisdom books with the wisdom of all these other adult women, felt safe and supported at the entrance of her own journey through adolescence to womanhood, whereas most young girls feel really scared and alone.
You mentioned, I want to ask one brief question, we'll go back to the phones in just a second. You mentioned that the most, I guess, profitable ideas will come from those left of center. You say you're a member of the religious left.
Yeah, I actually don't believe that the best ideas are coming from the left of center anymore, not the secular left, because I think moral relativism sank the secular left. I do believe that the religious left is where the best new ideas come from. Well, right now it's a handful of spokespeople, people like Cornel West, Michael Lerner, Jim Wallace, who are oriented toward a spiritual life and ask questions about right and wrong, but unlike the religious right, are deeply committed to Jesus' original vision, or the original vision of most of the great religious leaders, of profound equality, profound social justice, profound radical change into society to support the weakest and most vulnerable of us.
We'll take a phone call from Severn, Maryland next. Good morning.
Hi, how are you?
It's fine. How are you?
Hi. First off, I really enjoy the show. Like
Thanks.
listening to it frequently. But I have a question for Ms. Wolf. You seem to blame a lot of the teenage promiscuity, that type of thing, on, you know, the penthouse culture, as you called it. And yet, wasn't it the National Organization of Women, wasn't it Ms. Magazine, wasn't it a lot of the feminist literature that told young girls, I'm talking 12, 13, 14, that they were women. They had control. They had control of their own bodies. They had control of everything.
Interesting.
And as a result, you know, no one could tell them what to do. And you know, it's kind of a two-way street. If there's a penthouse mentality, then isn't there also the other mentality that says, "Gee, I'm lonely. I think I want a baby."
I hear what you're saying, and in fact, there's an element of your argument that I in fact agree with, surprisingly enough, considering I'm an ardent feminist. Promiscuities does look, I think it's, as far as I know, the first story of coming of age from childhood into adolescence, watching the sexual and social revolutions of the 70s from a child's eye point of view. And that includes criticism of the sexual revolution, the way it unfolded in a way that was great fun for adults, but really translated into broken homes for children, abandonment for children, dads finding themselves and decamping with their young secretaries, and the wounds that left in girls and boys coming of age. But I also talk about how feminism, at least in the second wave in the 70s, really devalued parenting, just like the sexual revolution devalued parenting. And there are some classic feminist positions about treating girls as if they're adult women, like the push to make sure that teenage girls can have abortions without parental consent, that I do think are wrongly judged. The way I think the Supreme Court decision to not put any guidelines or limitations on pornography on the internet are ill-judged. Basically, in our culture of adult freedom, we've forgotten that what's freedom for adults is not only sometimes abandonment for children, but sometimes in terms of graphic images or onerous expectations of adult behavior is a boundary violation for children. And I think the way we're expecting children, adolescents, to negotiate adult sexuality, the way we're expecting them to deal with being bombarded with graphic sexual images, is really a form of child abuse. And I'm a free speech feminist, but I think that civilization will survive if grown-ups have to, ask the newsagent to go in the back to get a hustler, so that little kids coming of age, girls trying to figure out what being female and sexual means, don't have to get those images from a woman on all fours on the cover of Playboy or Penthouse.
I want to ask you, before you lose the point of the child abuse, about a character in your book named Tia.
Yeah.
You write quite a bit about her, and I wonder if you would tell the audience about that and how you came to write about that.
Yeah, well, all of the people in Promiscuities are real people whose identities I've disguised, and Tia was a girl I knew when I was 13 at summer camp who got pregnant and had to leave the camp. There's a chapter called Sluts that has the stories of both Tia and Dinah, these are pseudonyms, who were both kind of designated sluts in our preteen subculture. And that's an illustration of how, even while there was all this rhetoric of freedom, teenage girls were really bearing the brunt of the same old dangers implicit in sexuality sort of bearing down on them too young, too soon, and that they were punished the same old way that sluts have always been punished in the past. So the point is that even though there was all this language of this is the best of all possible worlds, sexual freedom for women, feminist freedom for women, the scripts we were coming of age with, whether it was the Penthouse script or the You're Still a Slut script, were scripts not of our making.
Next phone call comes from Tampa, Florida. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I happen to like your book and the issues that it addresses. Excuse me.
Thank you.
And I was wondering if there is some way. I know that we have our sex classes or human sexuality classes in school, and they're a lot different from what I had taken when I was a teenager.
What's the difference?
Gee, I wouldn't even know where to start. It was more, they taught us health more than sexuality. And we do need to teach our children more sexuality because of telecommunications today and the issues that are dealt with on television that our children are forced.
Right.
And they're having to grow up a lot younger,
Right.
which is unfortunate for us.
And for them.
I was wondering if there is a way to teach kind of the separate issues that your book is pointing out into our schools.
I do believe that, and I have to say as a mom, that's why I wrote this book. I feel like if the grown-ups, if the moms and dads are not going to step in and create a more positive, value-filled sexual culture for kids coming of age, you know, being bombarded not only with pornography culture, but with Friends, with MTV, with rap music that talks about girls as hoes and so on, then who's going to do it? And I know that this is a pressing concern of parents as they're beginning to wake up to just how impressionable kids' sexual identities are. I believe that it's possible to reintroduce values education into sex education. I talk in this chapter about how I lost my own virginity at 15, about how when we went to the clinic to get contraception, my boyfriend and I, we were given everything we needed mechanistically, right? And it worked and it was cheap. So it addressed the problem on a physical level, but on a spiritual or moral level, we were really being processed like animals. I mean, it was like going to the vet. You know, we were not given any sense of, I mean, it was easier than learning to drive a car. You know, we were given the keys to the adult kingdom without any sense that we needed to prove we were mature enough, that we understood, that we were not supposed to use our sexuality in a way that was harmful, that we understood that we were supposed to use our sexuality always in a way that was respectful both of the fact that I believe God gave us our sexuality and that the harm that can be done is so great implicitly if you're not careful. And I think we should, you know, bring back a sense of right and wrong in teaching about sex ed. For example, there's an op-ed in today's paper about how teen mothers really need to get the message that what they do is wrong. You know, I take that point, but where are all the teen fathers? No one is telling boys, no one practically is telling boys it is shameful for you to be so irresponsible about your sexuality that you bring about an unnecessary or preventable abortion, let alone a teen pregnancy.
Next phone call comes from Spanish Fort, Alabama. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Ms. Wolf, I really just had a comment. I have not caught the entire program. I caught the program where you were talking about Barbie. And I thought it was quite interesting because I grew up with all the Barbie paraphernalia you could possibly have. Mm-hmm. And never at any point in my life did I feel that way toward a Barbie doll. To me, a Barbie doll was just a doll.
Right, I hear you. Well, like sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. I take your point. And, you know, it's very subjective. I mean, the way you respond to your toys or the way you pick up messages about what it means to be a woman is very subjective, and my own riff about Barbie as sexual icon may or may not resonate with other women, you know, who had happier memories of Barbie.
Last phone call comes from Monrovia, California. Good morning.
How you doing?
Fine. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm wondering, in light of the comments about the spiritual aspect of responsibility and sexual behavior and so forth, how your views, since you mentioned Christ and all that, how your views of him or of the Bible and historic biblical Christianity that taught that sex before marriage is fornication, which is sinful, and how you view the idea of being responsible sexually but not include that taking place after vows are made.
Right. Very good question. I do tell the story of where our ideas of female sexuality came from. And of course in the West they came from the Judeo-Christian tradition. So I go back to Numbers and Leviticus in the Old Testament to talk about how the idea of the slut or the woman whose sexuality is out of control first originated, and also certainly to St. Paul and the Christian tradition that codified the virgin whore dichotomy. You know, I'm very committed to a spiritual path, but I don't agree that sex before marriage is sinful. I can't speak for Jesus. I know that Jesus always said be tolerant and that people should do their best. But I do think that, I do believe, for instance, that a committed, loving gay marriage, which is raising children in which both parents are sacrificing for their kids, is of a higher moral order, in my view, than a self-indulgent, unfaithful heterosexual marriage in which the kids are suffering. So these are important social debates to have, but I think the tenor of the debate is raised when both people, both sides, left and right, are coming at it from a moral, if not a spiritual perspective.
Can I get you, we have a little under 2 minutes left, and we have to go to a live event. Can I get you to summarize what you were saying earlier about those suggestions for parents to help their young girls along this process?
Right. Role model, if you're a mom, sexual self-respect. Dads, if you're still married or if you're divorced, girls need you to be there as the safe male gaze to mirror your developing femininity, give girls a sense that, oh, I don't have to have intercourse with this guy in order to feel that I have an adult, male or a male who loves me, who respects me. Let's teach petting in schools, certainly, if within a context of love, limits, and responsibility. Let's give our girls coming of age ceremonies and rituals that teach them that being a woman is something to be proud of and to treat with self-esteem and self-respect, rather than letting them absorb, without our help, the messages from the culture that female sexuality is ludicrous or silly, or the way that Penthouse and Beavis and Butthead portray it to be to our girls who deserve so much more.
Did you have fun writing this?
It was a great experience writing it. It's an even better experience talking to readers.
What's next?
What's next is long vacation.
All right, we've been talking with Naomi Wolf this morning. She is the author of Promiscuities, The Secret Struggle for Womanhood, and this book is on sale at bookstores, I'm sure, everywhere.
Yeah.
We thank you very much for being with us this morning. And before you go, one quick question. What kind of response have you gotten from the White House on this?
Oh,
Fanny?
There's a Chinese wall between my husband's work and mine.
Separate.
Yeah.
All right, well, that being said, we want to let you know that coming up this afternoon there will be a 1 o'clock news briefing on the progress of Pathfinder as it sends back more pictures from the Mars probe. And that will be at 1 o'clock this afternoon from NASA. And tomorrow on the Washington Journal, you can expect to talk with Alan Ludwig of NASA's Policy and Planning Division. He will talk as well about the Pathfinder probe. We will talk as well about the Mir situation, what's going on with Mir. There has been a delay in sending up the crew. And what we do expect to hear from him is what the progress of sending up a new crew to help provide the repairs and make the repairs happen for the Mir space station. We should find out from him when that will happen and in what kind of order those things will take place. I want to let you know as well, next week on this particular show, Karen Lehrman will join us. She is the author of the book Lipstick Proviso, and you can expect that coming up next week on this particular program, the Washington Journal. We are waiting just briefly to go to a live event from NASA this morning, which is going to be another update on the Pathfinder Mars probe situation. We showed you some pictures a little bit earlier today about what essentially was going on there. They had discovered that this particular area that had been landed in actually had some signs of life some time ago. There is a discussion as to what kind of life, just what kind of time frame that life existed in, and most likely we will have an update on that a little bit later on this afternoon. As we mentioned to you, the news conference at 1 o'clock this afternoon will most likely include some of the findings from the probe, as well some prognosis for when you can expect Mars probes to start bringing samples back to Earth. And Naomi Wolf, since you're here, we're not going to try to pretend that we're not in control of this situation. The news conference hasn't started, the briefing hasn't started. What do you know about Mars?
I know what every American knows. It's tremendously exciting to see those pictures, and I can't wait to find out if we're not alone.
Well, what do you think in terms of the discussion going on as well as Roswell, New Mexico? What do you know? Do you know about what's been going on in Roswell? There's been a discussion as to whether it was a crash test dummy or an alien.
Right. I think that I mean, this is just like gut level response, woman in the street, but the explanation seems a little tortured.